Who raised you more? Your parents, your grandparents, or someone else?
My parents said they had too much going on to come to my thesis defense. That's what they said, like they were talking about a dentist appointment or a forgotten coffee date. Just a throwaway excuse said with a shrug and a smile over the phone, as if the words didn't land like a slap on my chest. I stood there in the middle of my small kitchen, holding the phone to my ear with one hand and the final draft of my thesis in the other. My palms were sweaty. My heart was racing. And I remember thinking, this is the biggest moment of my academic life, and they won't even be in the room. It wasn't even a proper call. It was a voicemail from my mom, actually, cheerful tone and all. Hey, sweetie, just wanted to let you know your dad, and I won't make it out this weekend. Ethan's tournament got rescheduled, and it's a big one. We'll be cheering him on, of course. Hope the defense goes great. Love you. Then a beep. That was it. No mention of the 6 years I spent buried in lab reports, grant proposals, or peer-reviewed journals. No question about how I was feeling or whether I needed anything. Just golf. Ethan's golf. As always. I didn't reply. What was the point? The next morning, I walked into that defense room wearing the navy blue blazer I had picked out months ago, the one I'd hoped my mom would compliment. My advisor smiled when she saw me. My committee nodded politely. There was a small audience, mostly students and faculty. My best friend Nora sat in the back with a giant iced coffee and a quiet thumbs up, God bless her. But no family. No proud parents with cameras. No balloons or flowers or teary hugs in the hallway. Just me, standing in front of a projector screen, reciting 3 years of molecular protein data like I wasn't screaming inside. I nailed the defense, by the way. I knew I would. I had rehearsed it down to the minute. I anticipated every question, handled every counterpoint, and by the end, my advisor said, flawless. Truly, Claire. I smiled and thanked her, pretending it was enough to hear that from someone who actually knew what it took to get there. That night, I took myself out to dinner because apparently I was the only one who thought the day mattered. I sat at a small Italian place near campus, white tablecloth, glass of wine, candle flickering quietly. I stared out the window, wondering if I was being dramatic, if I was just expecting too much. Maybe most people don't get parades for finishing grad school. But when I opened Instagram, any hope of rationalizing it died instantly. My parents had posted 6 stories from Ethan's tournament. 6 videos of his swing. A boomerang of my mom and dad clinking plastic cups on the sidelines. A selfie with Ethan captioned, our champ. And the kicker? A group photo with his coach that read, wouldn't miss this for the world. Wouldn't miss this for the world. I sat there in that restaurant with my phone still glowing in my hand, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel sad, I felt hollow. Like someone had scooped the inside of my chest out with an ice cream scoop. I wasn't even surprised. That was the worst part. I was just tired. Because this wasn't new. This was just louder. Ethan had always been the one they invested in time, money, attention. He was their golden boy. Private golf coaches since middle school, weekend tournaments across the state, new equipment every Christmas. My mom kept a scrapbook of his trophies. I once overheard her at a dinner party tell someone, he has that spark, you know? That it factor. We're just so proud. When I won the regional science fair sophomore year, she forgot to pick me up. I waited outside the gym for 40 minutes before walking home. I remember carrying my trifold board under my arm, wondering if anyone else's mom was late too. That night, sitting at the Italian place, I finished my wine and stared down at the little dessert menu like it could give me answers. I didn't cry. I didn't call them. I just paid my check, went home, and opened my laptop. Because the truth is, I had already written something worth more than any golf trophy. They just didn't care to see it. That night, while brushing my teeth, I thought about a conversation I had once with my dad during undergrad. I had been debating whether to switch majors. I was leaning toward molecular biology, which felt huge at the time. I was nervous. Unsure. But when I told him, he didn't ask what drew me to it or what my plans were. He just said, is there money in that? Sounds like a lot of school. Then he asked how Ethan's golf lesson went that day. People always talk about daddy issues like it's some punchline, but there's a unique ache in realizing your own father might never be genuinely interested in you, not unless you're winning something he understands. I defended my thesis that Friday. By Saturday, Ethan's team had won regionals, and my parents posted a group picture with his team and the caption, "So proud of our boy." No mention of me. Not a word. Like I didn't just become Dr. Claire Morgan. Then came Sunday. I was walking across campus when I bumped into Dr. Patel, one of the committee members. She congratulated me again, then casually said, "You know, Claire, that work you presented, especially your enzyme breakdown model, it's award-level material. You should really submit it to the National Innovation Board. They're reviewing entries through March." I gave her the same smile I'd been giving everyone that week. "Maybe," I said, "if I have time." But in my head, something shifted. A door creaked open. Because maybe time wasn't the problem. Maybe silence had been the problem all along. And maybe, just maybe, the best way to be heard wasn't through a confrontation, but through a microphone. And if the right people were listening, even better. Because I didn't want an apology. I wanted them to see what they missed. And I had a feeling they were about to. I don't know what I expected to happen after my thesis defense. Maybe some kind of internal transformation, a surge of validation, a sense of closure or pride, but instead, all I felt was a quiet, simmering weight that sat at the base of my spine and refused to leave, as though the silence that followed the most important moment of my career was not only expected, but somehow preordained. The only person who reached out beyond a congratulatory email or a polite, "well done," was Nora, who brought over wine and pizza and told me, with no small amount of fury, that if she had been me, she would have changed her last name and sent my family a screenshot of the diploma with the caption, "Too busy for this?" But I didn't do any of that. I just said thank you and let her vent, even though I knew she was more outraged than I could bring myself to be. Because, at some level, I wasn't shocked. And if you're not shocked, it's harder to be angry. All that's left is tiredness. The kind that lives in your bones. 2 days later, I got a call from Ethan. No text ahead of time, no context, just his name lighting up my screen while I sat at my desk reorganizing some files for my advisor. For a split second, I thought maybe he was calling to say congratulations, maybe even to apologize for monopolizing the weekend, but I should have known better. Ethan rarely called unless he wanted something or unless he was bored. I answered, and before I could get out a full hello, he launched into a story about how his final swing on Saturday would have gone viral if his coach hadn't blocked the angle of the shot. He'd watched the replay like 6 times, he said, and couldn't believe it didn't make the regional news highlights. I listened, not saying much, just humming here and there to show I was technically still on the line, until finally he paused and asked how my weekend had been. I said, flatly, that it was fine. I had defended my thesis. There was a beat of silence on the other end, then a half-laugh like he'd just remembered. "Oh right, yeah. That science thing. Congrats, sis." And that was it. No questions, no curiosity, not even a "what happens now?" I should probably say here that Ethan wasn't a bad person, not in the classic sense. He wasn't cruel or deliberately dismissive, but he was so used to being the center of everything that he moved through the world like attention was owed to him. When we were kids, he had a way of making every conversation about himself, every victory louder, every loss someone else's fault. And our parents fed it like it was something noble, like confidence instead of entitlement. When I got my first internship at a research lab, my mom nodded and said, "That's nice, honey. Just don't forget to be home in time for Ethan's tournament this weekend." When Ethan sprained his wrist at 15, we canceled a family trip to Florida and spent 2 weeks driving him to and from therapy 3 times a week. When I had pneumonia junior year and missed a week of school, my dad asked me to suck it up because Ethan needed help studying for a math test. It wasn't that they didn't love me, I don't think. I was just never the one they bragged about. Not at church, not at dinner parties, not in Christmas letters. I was the sweet one, the quiet achiever, the daughter who was so smart but low maintenance, the one they didn't have to worry about. They saw my independence as a gift, but the truth is, it was armor. And I had been wearing it for so long that even I forgot what it was protecting. That Friday night, Ethan had a celebratory dinner at the country club our parents had joined a few years ago, the kind of place with dim lighting, overpriced appetizers, and golf trophies lining every wall. I wasn't going to go, but Nora, ever the devil on my shoulder, insisted that I show up just to remind them that I still existed. So I did. I showed up, wearing a deep green dress I'd bought for academic presentations, not social ones, and walked into that dining room to the sound of my family erupting with laughter at some story Ethan was telling, my dad clapping him on the back, my mom beaming like she'd won the lottery. They were halfway through the first bottle of wine when I slipped into the empty seat at the table, unnoticed at first, until Ethan looked up, blinked like he was surprised to see me, and said, "Oh hey, you made it." My mother smiled, genuinely but vaguely, the kind of smile you give someone at the grocery store when you're not sure if you know them. No one asked about my defense. No one asked how it had gone or what came next. The entire dinner revolved around Ethan's victory, how he'd pulled through in the final round, how the wind nearly cost him a stroke, how the coach said he had potential for a full ride if he kept training. My father raised a glass and said, "To Ethan, our pride and joy," and I watched the words hang in the air like a bad smell no one acknowledged. I don't remember what I ate. I just remember swirling the wine in my glass, nodding along as they made plans for Tampa in a few weeks, and feeling like I had wandered into someone else's celebration by mistake. It was around 9 when my phone buzzed in my purse. I slipped it out, grateful for the distraction, and saw the email subject line, "Finalist Notification, National Science and Innovation Award." I opened it, and my eyes skimmed the words, "Finalist, Exceptional Contribution, Stage Presentation in New York, Travel Covered, National Coverage." I stared at it for a moment, then looked up at the table of people who still hadn't asked a single question about my week. I tucked the phone back into my bag, leaned back in my chair, and smiled. Not because they noticed, but because they wouldn't. And that made what came next even better. I waited 3 days before calling them, not because I was nervous or because I needed their approval, but because part of me still held on to the absurd, fragile hope that maybe this time would be different. Maybe something inside them would recognize the magnitude of what was happening. Maybe they would call me first, not out of obligation but out of genuine pride, the kind that drives a parent to say, "We booked the tickets, sweetheart. We wouldn't miss it for the world." But no such call came, and by the time Wednesday afternoon rolled around, I stared at my phone for a solid 10 minutes, trying to convince myself that it didn't matter if they showed up or not. This was about me, not them. And I didn't need their presence to validate my success. That was the mature stance, the strong one, the one I had rehearsed in my head ever since I hit submit on my application for the National Science and Innovation Award. Still, something compelled me to dial my mother's number, and the moment her voice answered with that always too chipper, "Hi, honey," I knew, with the kind of certainty you feel in your gut, that I would regret making the call. But I pushed forward, ignoring the tightness in my throat, and told her I had news, big news. I explained, in detail, what the award meant, the prestige of being a finalist, the national recognition, the opportunity to present my work live in New York in front of industry leaders, scientists, media outlets, and potential investors. I kept my tone calm, almost clinical, hoping that if I packaged the information correctly, it would be harder for her to dismiss. I even mentioned that travel and lodging would be covered, that all they had to do was show up. She responded with silence first, then a long wow, drawn out and weightless, like she was searching for the appropriate response, but couldn't quite locate it. Then came the inevitable pause, the telltale pause that always came before the letdown. "That's amazing, Claire," she said, in a voice so distant it could have come from a different zip code, "but I think that's the same weekend as Ethan's state qualifier in Tampa. Let me double-check the calendar, though. We'll see what we can do." I don't remember what I said in response, probably something polite, maybe even a half laugh to signal that I understood, even though I absolutely did not, but what I do remember is the way my pulse thudded in my ears as she continued talking. Now about the logistics of their trip, the flights to Tampa, the hotel they'd booked months in advance, the excitement Ethan was feeling, how he really thought this could be the one that put him on the radar for a full scholarship. She wasn't trying to hurt me, I don't think. She was just completely unaware of how little space I took up in her universe. And when my father picked up the phone halfway through the call to echo her sentiments, saying something about timing and too much going on right now, I realized that the weight I had been carrying wasn't disappointment, it was clarity. They weren't coming. Not because they couldn't. Not because they were ill or broke or physically unable to board a plane. They were simply choosing not to. Again. And this time, I wasn't going to hide how that felt. Later that evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at the blinking cursor in the empty document I'd titled Award Speech, Draft 1. I had no idea what I wanted to say at first, only that it needed to be sharp without being bitter, pointed without sounding desperate. I didn't want to rant. I didn't want to beg. I wanted to tell the truth, but in a way that made people feel it, in a way that didn't name names but still cut cleanly. I started typing slowly at first, the words unsure, fumbling over tone and phrasing. But then something shifted. The longer I wrote, the more deliberate my voice became. To those who were too busy for my thesis defense, thank you. Your absence gave me time. Time to grow. Time to stop waiting. Time to become the kind of woman who no longer needs permission to be proud of herself. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was enough. Enough to make me sit back in my chair, read it aloud to the empty room, and smile, not because I wanted to hurt them, but because for once, I wanted to say something without swallowing it first. For years, I'd been shrinking myself to avoid confrontation, smoothing the rough edges of my hurt so that no one else would feel uncomfortable. But discomfort was no longer my burden to carry. If my success made them uneasy, maybe it was time they sat with that discomfort. Maybe it was time they realized that love wasn't measured in attendance only when it was convenient or easy. The following week passed in a blur of logistics. The board sent over my flight itinerary and hotel accommodations, a press release detailing the lineup of finalists, and a photo request for the event program. Nora insisted on helping me shop for a new dress, one that screams competence and revenge at the same time, as she put it. We laughed about it, but underneath the humor was something heavier, a kind of shared understanding between two women who knew exactly what it meant to earn everything twice, once by doing the work, and once again by proving it mattered. Every time I thought about calling my parents again to remind them, I stopped myself. If they wanted to be there, they would. If they cared, they'd ask. And they didn't. 3 days before the event, I received the final program layout, a glossy PDF with photos of all the finalists, short bios, and presentation times. Mine was listed second to last, right before the closing keynote. Prime time. I was sandwiched between a biotech startup CEO and a climate tech pioneer with patents under his belt, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to apologize for being there. The night before I flew to New York, I got a text from my mom. Good luck this weekend. Wish we could be there. We'll watch if it's recorded. Send us the link after. No punctuation. No question about how I was feeling. Just a dismissal dressed as support. I didn't respond. Instead, I took one last look at the speech I had drafted and smiled, not because I thought it would change them, but because I knew it would change me. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The city was colder than I expected for late March, that early spring chill that seeps through even the heaviest coat, finding its way beneath scarves and into your bones, but the cold didn't bother me the way it usually did. Because my body was humming with something far more potent, an anxious energy that crackled just beneath the surface, refusing to be soothed by logic or layered wool. As the black car pulled up in front of the event venue, a tall glass building nestled between taller ones, I stared up at the revolving doors and tried to picture myself walking through them with the confidence I had rehearsed in my head, but never quite felt in my chest. The driver opened the door, and I stepped out into a moment that felt both surreal and overdue, the kind of cinematic entrance that was supposed to be witnessed by someone who'd known me long enough to appreciate the irony. But there was no one waiting with a camera, no familiar faces waving from the sidewalk. Just a name tag clipped to a lanyard and a schedule printed in fine, professional font. Inside, everything was sleek, modern, efficient. The lobby buzzed with controlled chaos, organizers in headsets, caterers wheeling in silver trays, attendees checking their badges at the registration desk. My heels echoed as I crossed the marble floor, the sound sharp and deliberate, each step reminding me that I had earned this space, that I wasn't here because someone opened a door for me out of pity or connection, but because my work stood on its own. Because someone on that review board read my paper and decided it deserved a stage. After check-in, I was ushered to a waiting area where the other finalists were gathered, some engaged in small talk, others tapping nervously on their phones, all of us pretending that this wasn't the biggest night of our lives. I found a quiet corner near the coffee station and sat down, adjusting my blazer and rereading my notes for the third time, though by now I could recite them backwards. The speech was memorized, the tone rehearsed, the cadence practiced until it felt like part of my skin, but what wasn't rehearsed, what couldn't be, was the knowing that this wasn't just about science or awards or recognition. It was about the weight of being unseen for so long that you start to believe invisibility is your natural state. When they finally called my name to line up backstage, I followed the handler through a long hallway, my footsteps softer now, steadier. The room behind the stage was dim, the lighting low and warm, casting long shadows across the floor. I stood just behind the curtain as the MC introduced the finalist before me, a woman whose startup had revolutionized low-cost water purification systems in developing countries. The applause was loud, enthusiastic, and it rang in my ears like a challenge. I stood there, clutching the printed version of my speech, not because I needed it, but because I didn't trust my hands to stay still otherwise, and I thought of my parents, likely checking into a hotel in Tampa or sitting at a restaurant with Ethan, laughing over pasta, completely unaware of what was about to happen. The moment came. My name was called. I stepped into the light. The stage was massive, the audience dim beyond the first few rows, and the spotlight made it hard to see individual faces, but I could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on me, some curious, some bored, some waiting for me to stumble. I walked to the center, took a breath, and began. I started with the basics, the research, the implications, the technical highlights, because that's what they expected. I spoke about molecular adaptations and enzyme efficiency, about breakthroughs in treatment resistance and long-term applications, and I did it all without so much as a quiver in my voice. But then came the end, the section I had rehearsed more times than any other, the part where I was supposed to thank the people who had brought me to this moment. And I paused, just long enough to make the silence feel intentional. To those who were too busy for my thesis defense, I said, letting the words hang in the air like smoke, thank you. Your absence gave me time. Time to grow, to focus, to stop waiting for applause that was never coming. Time to realize that silence can be just as motivating as praise. This award belongs to the girl who sat alone in the back of the science fair with her project and no one to drive her home. It belongs to the woman who decided that being overlooked doesn't mean being unworthy. There was a beat of stunned silence, then scattered claps, then louder applause, a wave of sound that didn't feel polite, it felt earned. I nodded once, then turned and walked off stage, heart pounding not from nerves, but from the electricity of having said something I'd waited years to say. Backstage, no one said anything for a moment. Then a volunteer smiled, said that was something else, and handed me a small envelope containing a certificate and event schedule for the after-party. I thanked her, barely hearing her voice, because my phone, which I had silenced earlier, was now buzzing non-stop in my clutch. I stepped into the hallway, opened the screen, and watched as message after message poured in, texts from colleagues, former professors, distant acquaintances who had seen the live stream or the clips already circulating on social media. The first name that popped up, bold and unmistakable, was Ethan. He called. I didn't answer. He called again. I still didn't answer. Then came the text. What the hell was that? Mom's crying. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then locked the phone and slipped it back into my bag. Because in that moment, I wasn't ready to explain myself. Not yet. And certainly not to them. I had said enough. I didn't call him back. Not that night. Not the next morning either. though he tried again more than once, the first call coming in just after 7 in the morning, followed by another an hour later, then 2 texts back to back. The first one defensive and bristling with that entitled tone he always slipped into when he felt out of control, the kind of tone that made it sound like he had been wronged, not me, and the second one strangely quiet. Just 3 words that felt heavier than anything he could have said in anger. Are you serious? I read them both standing barefoot in my hotel room, staring out the window at a city that had always felt too big for me before, but now felt perfectly proportioned, as if all the space I'd carved for myself, slowly, methodically, painfully, had finally caught up to me. I thought about replying. I really did. I even typed out a few sentences, trying different angles, searching for a tone that wasn't bitter or triumphant or petty, but nothing came out right. Nothing I wrote could make the point without explaining what he already should have known. And what do you say to someone who's been the center of the story for so long they never even noticed there was another character in the background quietly building a different ending? What do you say to someone who saw your pain 100 different ways across a dozen years and never once asked where it came from? The truth is, I think he was shocked. Not just by the speech, but by the fact that I said it at all. For most of our lives, I had stayed in my corner, played the part, clapped when I was supposed to, smiled politely, swallowed hard when his name came up first in every conversation, every toast, every Christmas letter. And maybe, in some twisted way, he thought I liked being the quiet one, the easy one, the invisible achiever who never caused problems, never made demands, never forced anyone to choose between us. But the problem with invisibility is that it's easy to mistake it for contentment. And for years, I let them believe that my silence meant peace. That was my mistake. But once you say something out loud, really out loud, into a microphone, in front of an audience that's finally listening, there's no going back to quiet. By noon, the messages started coming in from my parents. My father first, with a tone that could only be described as performatively wounded. We had no idea you felt that way. You could have just told us. As if the problem was one conversation that never happened, and not a lifetime of erasure dressed up as logistical inconvenience. My mother followed with a longer message, this one wrapped in guilt and self-pity, explaining how hard it had been to raise 2 kids with such different needs, how proud they were of me, even if they didn't always say it, and how hurtful it was to be portrayed like villains in front of so many people. She wrote, "You made us look like bad parents," and all I could think was how telling it was that their public image mattered more than my private absence. I didn't respond to either of them, not immediately, not with explanations or apologies or reassurance, because for once, I didn't feel responsible for how they interpreted the truth. I wasn't cruel on that stage. I didn't call them names, didn't point fingers, didn't list their offenses like a prosecutor in court. I just said what had always been true, that they weren't there. That they had chosen other priorities. That I noticed. That it mattered. That evening, I sat on the flight back to Boston with my laptop open, not to work, not to write another speech or edit my research notes, but to finally look through the photos from the event, the ones the official photographer had uploaded to the shared drive. There was one of me on stage, captured mid-sentence, hands steady, eyes forward, body poised, and I saved it to my desktop before uploading it to a printing service. I chose a large frame. I wanted it to hang where I could see it every day, not because I needed the reminder of the moment, but because I needed the reminder that I didn't imagine it all, that I didn't overreact, that the hurt was real and so was the way I carried it. When I got home, Nora was waiting at my apartment, sitting on the stoop with a bottle of wine and a look that said she'd seen the whole thing go down online and had approximately 50 opinions to share. We didn't talk about the award right away, or the speech, or the dozens of comments circulating through Science Twitter about the girl who called out her parents on national television, or even the phone calls I hadn't answered. We just sat for a while, watching the city breathe its usual rhythm, and eventually she said, "So, how does it feel?" And I told her the truth, which surprised even me. It felt quiet. Not empty, not victorious. Just still. Because once the noise fades, the clapping, the headlines, the righteous anger, what's left is you, sitting in the center of your own story, Wondering if you finally said too much or not enough. Wondering if being right was worth being alone. Wondering if the people you always wanted to reach will finally listen or just retreat deeper into their own defensiveness. Ethan hasn't called again. Not since that first day. He's probably still angry. Or confused. Or just embarrassed. Part of me imagines him trying to explain the moment to his teammates or his coach, twisting the facts, omitting the context, because he's still trying to protect a version of our family that only ever existed in his mind. And maybe that's his right. Maybe that's his survival. As for my parents, they've gone quiet too, after a few more texts that I read but didn't acknowledge. I'm not punishing them. I'm just no longer performing. There's a difference. I spent too many years showing up to their milestones, clapping from the sidelines, pretending it didn't sting when they didn't do the same for me. I gave them grace when I had nothing left to give, hoping that one day they'd notice the shape of the silence and ask what it meant. They never did. So I answered in the only language I had left, public truth. The award now sits on my bookshelf, next to a photo of me at 8 years old, standing next to a volcano model I made out of papier-mâché, smiling too wide for someone who knew no one was coming to see it. I keep both there, side by side, because they belong to the same story, a story that still doesn't have a clean ending and maybe never will. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a moment. It's a decision you keep making in silence, over and over, without applause. And maybe I'll call them next week. Maybe I'll send them the recording. Maybe I'll let them sit with it a little longer. Because some things can't be unsaid once they're spoken, and some truths don't require a response. They just need to exist, fully, finally, out loud. And for now, that's more than enough.